And so within framework, there's this concept of trustworthiness and how you measure and how you manage the risks and the benefits associated with those trustworthy characteristics, with the ultimate objective of establishing what we call a risk-aware culture.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. Our broadcast today comes from our most recent Metis Strategy Digital Symposium, and the topic we covered was the future of secure, responsible artificial intelligence. I spoke with Martin Stanley, the Strategic Technology Branch Chief of the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency, or CISA. Martin also leads the development of artificial intelligence strategy for the agency and has an appointment in the Office of Emerging Technologies at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Well, certainly, whenever we talk about innovation generally and artificial intelligence more specifically, the topic of cybersecurity needs to be a portion of what is contemplated as well. And as the topic of Gen AI cybersecurity became much more prominent in the early portion of this year, I reached out to some of my friends who are the authors of the NIST cybersecurity framework. And when I caught up with them, I asked them, about what their thought process is, how that's evolving, and they indicated the person of greatest influence in that space is Martin Stanley, and I was very grateful that they introduced me to him, and he joins me here today. Martin's the Chief of Strategic Technology Branch and leads the development of artificial intelligence strategy for the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. Martin previously led the Cybersecurity Assurance Program at DHS and the Enterprise Cybersecurity Program at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. He's also held multiple positions in the private sector as well. Martin, welcome. It's great to speak with you today.
Thank you. Boy, what a great panel. Filippo and Vish, I think, really nailed it and talked a lot about something that will come about as we talk about risks, which is the use cases and how those use cases really differ and require a lot of different thought. I'm interested to see what the poll results from this. I suspect it's going to be all over the map based on what people are concerned about and what things are actually using AI for.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that as well and share your excitement for the content just covered. Well, as I mentioned, you are the Strategic Technology Branch Chief of CISA. You're also on assignment to NIST, who I mentioned before, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And there's a precedent in the partnership between these organizations, such as the Federal Information Security Management Act of 2002, which had touch points between the organizations. I want to just take a quick moment and talk briefly about the rationale for your secondment and the value in the partnership between these bodies.
Sure. So I think you really nailed it. And I think that's the underlying theme for this entire conference is the idea that there's cybersecurity and a lot of collaboration around cybersecurity and going back many years across the federal government, but in particular between NIST and CISA. And we're seeing the same thing with artificial intelligence. And there's so many different federal initiatives right now. We could go on and talk about in depth about any one of them, but we'll try and hit on as many of them as possible. But I think one of the main and most important points out of all this is there's a longstanding effort. None of this is new. This work's been going back 5, 6, 7 years on how we're going to manage artificial intelligence and how we're going to deploy new technologies in a responsible way. And so I think we'll be able to talk a little bit about that and about our partnership. I am on assignment to the Trustworthy and Responsible AI Resource Center at NIST, working for Elham and Riva, who are the authors of the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. And also back at my home agency, CISA, we've done a lot of work to flesh out specifically what CISA is going to be doing in the AI lane. We have published an artificial intelligence roadmap, which is available for folks to take a look at. And then at the department level, there's been so much work done with the announcement of the first chief artificial intelligence officer, who's the DHS CIO, Eric Hyson, and then a lot of materials that have been published, in particular, a privacy impact assessment, which is publicly available, again, on the DHS website. It's a privacy impact assessment for the department's use of generative AI. And I think these are the kinds of leadership steps that we're seeing across many of the departments and agencies. I'm currently in the process of reaching out to all the chief artificial intelligence officers, which is a requirement in the artificial intelligence executive order, in order to talk with them about what their needs are. And what we're finding, Peter, is that per the previous panel, there's a lot of communities of interest that are going to be evolving around particular use cases. And I think they're going to be working together to identify, to manage and to measure risks associated with the adoption of artificial intelligence in their mission.
No, it's great to hear the degree of emphasis that this topic is being given, and the cooperation that's happening across multiple parts of the government, with naturally a lot of consequences to the private sector as well. We'll get into some of that in a bit. But I want to talk about the AIRMF, the Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework. Talk a bit about its substance and how that's evolving.
Sure, great question. So the Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework came out of 2 executive orders from the previous administration. One of those executive orders was around preserving U.S. leadership in artificial intelligence, and the second EO was around the trustworthy use of artificial intelligence in the federal government. And the directions to NIST were to identify what were the best areas to wade into the standards, what could be of most use to the community. And then from a trustworthiness perspective, this concept of trustworthy AI and responsible use of AI that's the origin of it. Within the Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework, there's a couple of important concepts. I think the first thing to communicate to the group, and we've heard it already, is it's really a benefit risk framework, in the sense that we're thinking about what are the opportunities and how can we leverage technology in a way that's transformational, while at the same time doing it in a way that's going to minimize the kinds of regrets that we might have. And so that's much different than some of the other risk frameworks that we're familiar with, in particular, from my world of cybersecurity, where we're really mostly just worried about vulnerabilities. That said, the AI risk management framework is consistent in its use of language around, risk language. So we're talking about threats and impacts and likelihoods and that kind of thing, which is very approachable. Trustworthiness is a central theme within the Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework, and it's comprised of 7 characteristics, which line up very closely to the things that were listed in the poll. And so within the framework, there's this concept of trustworthiness, these 7 trustworthy characteristics, and how you identify and how you measure and how you manage the risks and the benefits associated with those trustworthy characteristics, with the ultimate objective of establishing what we call a risk-aware culture. So it's a cultural transformation, which means we're not going to manage or eliminate risks completely. What we're going to do is we're going to figure out how we live with them, how we monitor them, how we understand them, and how we manage all the people that are involved in interacting with the systems, as well as just the systems themselves. So, what we're used to is these systems and data as objects, but in this case, we're looking at the people as well involved in the engagement with these systems, because at the end of the day, that's what the risk management framework is about. It's about protecting people and realizing the benefits of technology for people.
I really like that framing across the entire response, but the risk-aware culture, and frankly, the awareness that some risk is appropriate. You're not innovating if you're not taking some, but also making sure it's a cultural attribute that the organization recognizes the risks that are being taken, has plans if the worst comes to pass, and so forth. I think the focus on the cultural element of this, as it is often the people components that actually can create the risk, is an important area of emphasis. Well, why don't we, Addison, if I could trouble you to pull up the poll results, let's have a quick gander at those. So what do you see as the largest AI-related risk to your organization? And boy, Nostradamus Stanley here predicted it correctly, as it is across the map. We've got, let's see here, 26% saying data privacy, 19% for uncontrollable AI and AI-enabled cyber attacks. All told, we have 5 different categories and double digits represented across the people who responded to this. Thank you so much for all the folks who responded, and really indicative of the fact that there are risks in a variety of different ways, and obviously different levels of or in a variety of areas, in fact, to continue to monitor as well. Obviously, in some ways, you kind of predicted this. Any other further reactions you have, Martin, upon viewing it?
Well, so just to the respondents, first of all, thank you for being honest and providing a great prop for the conversation here. But th- you shouldn't feel bad or lost as a result of that. The framework actually provides a construct for managing against all these different risks, also in the context of use with different kinds of stakeholders being engaged and involved in the process. And that's another big theme of the AI risk management framework, is in order to elicit and to identify these risks and these concerns and potential impacts and harms, and the like, as well as opportunities, we have to cast a much wider net than we normally do with IT. And I think we heard about that in the previous panel about talking, more broadly with stakeholders, with users, testing systems and evaluating systems while they're being used by actual people and users, and understanding potentially the way that recourse and redress needs to be built into the operational paradigm for those systems. So I think it was a great poll, and I think it was very informative to the group to understand that when we're talking about risks in these larger groups, folks may represent a particular risk and have to be educated on some of the other concerns that are also there. And so that will then further the discussion around risk tolerance and what the trade-offs potentially would be considered. And then to get into the last area, which is one of really, basically, emerging basic science at this point, is how we measure these kinds of risks. We don't typically have that capability today. We're used to using, our fixed controls, our static measures that we use over and over again. And in the context of artificial intelligence risk management, if we're trying to be risk aware, we can't solely rely on these fixed metrics.
Yeah. As I mentioned at the outset, you've been in the private sector as well as the public sector, and a few people who have joined us today would be surprised about the implications of the work that you were doing on the private sector, as many of them are using NIST frameworks of various kinds, the cybersecurity framework perhaps most prominently of all. But as you think about the public-private implications to the work that you were doing, any interesting conclusions that you have?
Well, so first of all, there's been a tremendous cooperation between public and private, and that cooperation continues. The AIRMF itself was produced out of multiple public working groups and open comment periods. All of the standards activity, all of the federal policies. There was recently a OMB memo that was a draft memo around use of artificial intelligence at federal agencies that was open for public comment. Pretty much all of the actions that are involved in the artificial intelligence executive order have open comment periods. One of the main functions of our work at NIST is to run this generative AI public working group to develop a specific AI RMF profile focused on generative AI. That is, there's probably people on this call attending this conference who have been participating there, and we really appreciate all of that help. It just goes on and on and on how much public-private partnership there is, and a recognition that we have to do this right. But more importantly, we have to do this. We don't have an option to say, no, we're not going to innovate. We're not going to adopt technology, because our stakeholders are going to use it. And we're hearing about it, here in the previous, in the previous panel. We're going to hear about it more today. So we have to become good at whatever our, however we support and we, assist the community. We have to be good at that. And that does not mean that will not allow us to avoid at the risks associated with this technology.
Can you also, again, as somebody who has experience in private and public sector, talk more generally speaking about the advantages of pursuing some of these ideas in a public sector, in the public sector? And I say this especially as I think there are many who would say that so many of these solutions are best drawn out through the marketplace and through the private sector, private enterprise. Talk a bit as somebody who's been so immersed in in driving really remarkable progress associated with this, of the advantages of pursuing some of these ideas in a public setting?
Sure. So I mean, I think you need all sides and all perspectives on this, and obviously the private sector has driven innovation incredibly. Where the public sector can come in is, specifically in ways which NIST has with the AI risk management framework. The AI risk management framework is intended to manage the risk of harms to people, to organizations, to ecosystems, to people, and planet. And that's that large group of stakeholders that are involved in using and engaging with artificial intelligence systems. And so we have to ensure that we're looking after all of those people. And I think the public sector is the right place to do that. And you see that again and again, but also it requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of input from all the right stakeholders to make the right kinds of recommendations and decisions around that. And I will qualify all this with NIST and CISA, both, my home agency, are not regulators. And so, nothing that we're talking about here is a regulation. These are voluntary frameworks that are rights-based and risk-based.
Well, Martin Stanley, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for the great and very important work that you do now across multiple institutions. You mentioned in the conversation the resources that people can leverage, both through DHS's website, also at NIST. This is not the first time that I will recommend to this cohort that they follow your recommendation and make their way to both sites to read about some of the great work that you and your team are doing. But we're honored to include you in our conversation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're available to assist, so please reach out if you have any particular questions. We're happy to meet individually with organizations as well.
That's wonderful. What a generous offer that is, Martin. Thank you again.